Welcome back to the show that asks the question, have we been here before in a past life? So far, we've seen singer and TV presenter Coleen Nolan take part in a regression session where she described the life of Julia, a girl who lived according to the strict social etiquette of Victorian England.
There's people here, but I'm dancing on my own. I'm not allowed to dance with men. I'm too young.
So, was Coleen remembering a past life, or is there another explanation for Julia Davenport's story? The question is, what do you believe? Could we have lived before?
People need to find the material for their stories from somewhere. They may do it from books or from films or from things that occurred to them in childhood. Usually it will be a confabulation of all three of those that will make it seem authentic.
A very popular form of drama these days is costume drama, where it's set in the 17th century or 16th century or whatever. And I think a lot of women's literature is about fantasy, is about going back to an age of elegance and crinolines and balls. And so it's not at all surprising that it should be seen by many women as a much more romantic era, and therefore an era in which they feel they would have been much more comfortable in.
Many people who are regressed, they come up with stories of romantic periods in history. And skeptics say, well, sure, they saw a movie last night, and that triggered some kind of a fantasy. But, well, wait, I say, sure, it triggered something. It did trigger a past life memory, a genuine past life memory. It's very natural because they lived in that period.
In a moment, Coleen will be joining me for the first time since her regression, and I'll be finding out what she makes of it all. But first, is there any historical proof behind Coleen's story? Time for our historian detective to reveal if he's been able to find any truth within the clues.
At first glance, I thought some of the clues that Coleen had given us were somewhat conflicting. But the more I got into it, the more I realised that what she was giving us was a glimpse into the world of a young woman in Victorian England. And this was her first clue.
Do you know what your name is? Julia Davenport.
Having a name is really terrific, and it gives me a fantastic excuse to come and root through thousands of archives. Now, I've had a bit of luck because I've found 4 birth certificates relating to a Julia Davenport from the 1840s and the 1850s. So it's tempting to think that one of these might be the Julia that Coleen talks about. But there's a problem. Because she never told us the name of her parents, we can't say for certain if any of these really are her. But she does give us a fantastic insight into the social hierarchy.
What kind of clothes are the people wearing in the ballroom? Beautiful gowns. Big gowns.
Dances are a happy theme in Coleen's regression, and why not for a young girl growing up in Victorian England? After all, dances and balls were where you got to network and socialise and possibly even meet the man or woman of your dreams. This was a time of Vanity Fair and Middlemarch, and where networking and climbing up the social ladder was everything.
And what month is it now? August.
The fact that she mentions August is, to me, really exciting because there were 2 huge balls held in that month. On the first, they celebrated the beginning of stag hunting, and a few days later, the glorious 12th celebrated the start of the grouse season. It's compelling stuff, but there's yet more.
There's people here, but I'm dancing on my own. I'm not allowed to dance with men. I'm too young.
In Victorian society, girls had to be formally introduced before they could socialise with men. This usually happened at 17 or 18, and it's what we now think of as a débutante's coming out ball. So Coleen is absolutely right. At 16, Julia would have been too young for this. There'd have to be no dancing with men for another year or so.
Who have you met? Eric. Where does he take you? What kinds of things do you get to do? Go on picnics.
riding.
So all this hanging around at balls finally pays off for Julia. She gets her man and they begin what by all accounts is a pretty standard Victorian courtship. Bit of picnicking, bit of riding, all very cosy stuff. And let's face it, Eric is an excellent strategic choice for a marriage.
And what does Eric's family do?
Father buys, sells, shipping, something to do with shipping.
In the mid-19th century, trade was booming, and as the British Empire grew, the shipping industry was making a fortune. Southampton, Eric's home, according to Coleen, was the perfect base for a shipping mogul. It all seems to fit together.
But there's one point I'm still struggling with, though. How could Julia have mixed it in such high society?
And what does your father do for a living?
Carpenter.
He's a carpenter.
It just doesn't seem right to me that a carpenter's daughter could have attended such a posh ball. Certainly, 50 years earlier, that would certainly have been the case. But this is the mid-1850s, the height of Victorian society. And at last, things were changing because the middle classes were on the move.
In the 1850s, a carpenter who embraced the new industrial ways and went in search of mass production could create a rich lifestyle for himself and his family. For Julia, this would have meant social freedom and the ability to secure the affections of a rich husband.
There's certainly something of the fairy tale about Coleen's regression. A keyhole into Victorian life. A young girl who finds the man of her dreams who's also worth a fortune. It certainly is a feel-good story. But does it feel right to you?
Does it feel right to you?
Oh, I think I've read that somewhere.
Do you?
I don't. Maybe that's how I wanted my life to be. I don't know. I mean, I'm shocked that he founded Julia Davenport because I don't know where that name.
Four.
Yeah, I don't know where that name came from. I don't know anybody called that. I've ever met anyone called that. So.
Do you read a lot of
That
books
shocks
that are set in that period?
Not that are set in that period, but I read a lot of romance. You know, where she meets her prince and they ride off in the sunset.
And what about the? Because there are a couple of things there. I mean, do you know that August is a serious month
No.
for balls?
No, had no idea about that. So I mean, it's so interesting to watch it. When that all went on, I actually eventually ended up experiencing Eric died, and I visited him, and then I died, and I went through all those emotions, and it was quite an experience, actually.
You were devoted to him, weren't you?
Absolutely. I visited his grave every day for an hour, every day for 30 years. Pathetic.
Is that the sort of thing that you could
Do now?
imagine yourself being?
Yeah, because I'd probably put him there now.
So you can't. Would you see that sort of devotion to a bloke?
I am. I have to say that I am one of these that when I do fall in love with someone, I really fall in love with them, and it's like 110%, to be honest. And I'm very romantic, and I get really, really fed up at times that things aren't like a Hollywood movie or a book. You know, I always say, like to Ray, if we do something, I'll go, you see, Doris wouldn't have said that to Cary Grant. It wouldn't have ended like that, you know. And he's like, stop living in a film.
How have you felt since having that done?
I remember a sense of very much well-being for a few days afterwards. I just thought it was lovely. I thought they had such a lovely life, and I remember feeling very content, you know, going home afterwards on the train and everything. I thought, oh, that was so lovely, and she was so lucky, and that was me. And I felt very privileged to have lived that kind of life back then.
She had a very strict, very rigid childhood background, and there must have been a part of your life that would have been like that.
Yeah, my dad was very strict. I mean, we all worked when we were kids and stuff, but my dad was always very strict. You know, there was no boys. We could have birthday parties, but there was no boys allowed from a very young age, let alone teenage years.
But also working as well in all families where there is this sort of this showbiz thing that they tend to say that it was so controlled and we were working so hard that you feel almost robbed of your childhood.
I think I was, to a degree. You know, when all my friends were going to birthday parties or going out or having sleepovers, I couldn't because I'd be working in a working men's club up in Scotland somewhere. So we did miss out a lot. So I do feel, yeah, that childhood was kind of lost.
Do you regret that?
I've never really thought, oh, I can't believe that, or hated my parents for it, because it was just a way of life for me. But I think it obviously affected me because I'm so anti all of that with my own kids. I so want them to have, as normal a childhood as possible.
So your childhood would have been in that sort of rigid way, very similar to Julia's.
To Julia's.
Let's see now what our experts make of this, because you've heard what Coleen thinks, but it is up to you, of course, to make up your own mind. Here's what our experts have got to say.
In her regression, Coleen talks about being on her own, and we know that very much in the present she has lots of sisters she's grown up with. I think this is Coleen's way of processing what life would be like had she been by herself, had she been an only child. How would she look? How would she behave? How would she be? Would she be a different person to the person she's actually today? This is not about a past life. This is a simple wondering, what would I be like had I been an only child?
Colleen's death in her regression was a very peaceful one. She died in her bed, surrounded by people she loved. I guess the kind of ending we'd all want to do. But having married and then her husband dies, she spends the next 30 years visiting his grave, showing a huge amount of faithfulness to his memory. And I think maybe again this reflects aspects of her current life, that she is somebody who a bit like the swan, wants to fall in love once and then, then die if the lover died first. So I think she's a woman who, with probably great passion, and a woman who shows her emotions in this way through absolute faithfulness.
I think Colleen's past life was not one that was affecting her negatively. I think it was kind of what we'd maybe call a time-out life, a very happy life where she was just happy, and she learnt maybe about the facets of love and showed she was a very caring character. I mean, going to that grave every day for 30 years was something to be kind of admired in a way.
So, when it comes down to it, there is, of course, one question. What do you believe now? Do you believe that you've been here before? You've done it. Do you believe that that was a past life and that you have been here before?
God, that's a hard question. Yes, I really, really want to believe it. And if it's not true, then I'm a very good actress with a very vivid imagination, and I know I'm not either of those things. So I definitely think there's something in it.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
For today. Join us again next time. We'll ask that question. Have we been here before?